Oh my gosh.
Okay, so hello everyone and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. This is a presentation called Discover the World of Bees. And so my name is Angela Glansman. My pronouns are she and her, and I am an urban beekeeper here at Alveole on our Toronto team.
Hi, everybody. My name is Andy, and I'm also an urban beekeeper here in Toronto on the Toronto team. Both Angela and I are the designated beekeeper for several Oxford property sites that we have here in Toronto. But I believe we also have some as part of our Vancouver, Calgary, Ottawa, and Montreal operations as well. And we're expanding in the US as well. So Oxford's a very valued client for us, and they're among some of my favorite sites. So we're so happy to be here today and celebrate Earth Day with you. Today's presentation is all about discovering the world of bees. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go along. We will most likely be answering those at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, Angela will start this off for us.
All right, let's take it away. So, they are builders, caregivers, and foragers. They defy the laws of physics, and they push themselves to the max every day. And they do all of this without harming any other living species, and instead they give life to the world around them. And here in the city, they give life to the neighborhood. There are some things that we know a lot already about honeybees. We certainly know what bees provide for us. We know that they make honey, and we know that they make beeswax too. And we know that there's some kind of connection between bees visiting flowers and allowing fruit and vegetables to grow. But bees probably seep into your life a little bit more than you would think. So whether it be the polish in your boots to make them waterproof, or the product that you put in your hair, whether it's from the honey in your cupboard to the cough drop or lip balm that you carry in your pocket, even to the fruit and vegetable aisles of the grocery store, bees and their impacts are all around us. And on the subject of bees seeping into our lives more than we think, did you know that in North America alone, we have over 4,000 different types of bees, and they are all incredible. Some are bright green, others are extremely fluffy, some are teeny, 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 tiny, and others, not so much. Some have co-evolved to have a beautiful symbiotic relationship with one particular type of flower, living only for the duration of its bloom. Sometimes that only means a couple of weeks. Some exist in very small numbers, mostly under human radar, whereas others, like our honeybee, have become highly domesticated. Despite their drastically different appearances, lifespans, and characteristics, what unites all of these pollinators are the extreme feats of dedication and strength that they will accomplish in their very short life cycles. Their entire lives will be devoted to laying enough eggs and collecting enough nectar and pollen to ensure that their offspring grow up healthy, hardy, and ready to pollinate the next season's blooms. Without their devoted work, much of the vegetation around us would not be able to reproduce. So although they are small, their impact is huge. And of all of these hundreds of different types of bees that coexist around us, only one lives in a social colony of thousands, and only one transforms nectar into the liquid gold that we call honey. And of course, if you haven't guessed it already, it is the honeybee. So humans and honeybees are incredibly intertwined, and although we know some things about them, there is a lot about a honeybee hive that is mysterious and honestly enchanting. Humans have been fascinated with honeybees for literally thousands of years, and it is said that the bee's life is like a magic well. the more that you draw from it, the more that it fills with water. And it couldn't be more true. So at Alveole, one of the reasons why we install hives on rooftops in the city is to share this inspiring world of bees with as many people as possible. So for the time that we have together today, we're going to take a break from everything and dive into the world of pollinators who coexist all around us, using the honeybee as our guide. And so we'll be leaving a question period at the end of the presentation. So feel free to leave questions in the comments section and we will get back to them in a bit. So let's go back to the very beginning of the relationship between honeybees and humans, back to 5000 BC, in fact, in ancient Egyptian times. The ancient Egyptians were some of the first beekeepers, and they highly valued honey in their society. This actually pictured here is one of the hieroglyphs for beekeeper. And the Egyptians believed that bees came from the tears of Re, the god of sun, and so they worshipped bees as a gift. And when early explorers entered the tombs of the pharaohs for the first time, they came across these huge vessels right next to the pharaoh's sarcophagi and assumed that they must have been filled with jewelry or precious properties or precious stones. But after analysis, they were actually filled with honey. So honey was so valued that pharaohs were buried with giant jugs at their sides to be able to bring it with them into the afterlife. And so honey was actually incorporated into many different parts of their society. They took advantage of its antibacterial properties in the vast majority of their medicines, and beeswax was a major ingredient of much of their cosmetics, much like today. So flash forward to 1622, when honeybees first arrived in North America. And so, like many of the plant and animal species that have become established in North America today, like apples, white-tailed deer, or trout, to name a few, honeybees were brought to North America from Europe, specifically on Jamestown ships arriving in what is now known as Virginia. So if it weren't for honeybees, many of the fruit trees and other crops introduced from Europe would never have been pollinated. And although they aren't endemic to North America, they're now considered a naturalized species having lived here for hundreds of years. And so although the way that we use hive byproducts and honey has remained pretty consistent since ancient times, beekeepers' hives have evolved throughout the years, and different cultures work with honeybee hives in different ways. So for instance, in the wild, honeybees tend to build their hives in sheltered, hollow spaces like tree trunks seen here. The ancient Egyptians also kept bees in big horizontal tubes and used these long, thin sticks to pull out and harvest the honeycomb, just like we saw in the hieroglyph. Then sort of scooting forward in time, in the Middle Ages in Europe, beekeepers kept their bees in round straw baskets that were portable. And eventually, more complex hives were created with actual interior structures provided for the bees, making the beekeeper's job just a little bit easier. And so this is what the hives that we at Alveole use today look like. And this is roughly what the hives, if you happen to have a hive on your rooftop, this is what the hives look like. And it's inside this quiet looking box that all of the action happens. You may also have seen other beehives or bee nests that look like this. These nests are meant to attract wild leaf cutters. Honeybees, leafcutters, mason bees, bumblebees, and dozens of other kinds of pollinators all live and work harmoniously within the city, although their life cycles are quite different from one another. Since most bees are not domesticated, their nests can be found underground, in trees, on plants, or if facilitated by humans, in hand-built pollinator habitats like this one pictured here. And so the solitary lives of most of our native pollinators are in stark contrast to the incredibly social nature of the honeybee. Really, a honeybee hive isn't too different from a city. The honeybee hive can actually be home to even more occupants than a small city, with populations reaching up to 50,000 bees in peak season. So although throughout the beekeeping season, what we do as beekeepers is add and remove boxes or supers seen here to accommodate the growth of the colony. And so at the hive entrance, the bees come and go which this entrance here runs along the bottom of the hive on one of the sides. You'll start to see the flight path that all the foragers leaving the hive will follow, and it changes each day depending on where the best flowers are. You'll see the foragers coming back with different colors of pollen, and in a hot day, you might see bees stationed at the front airing out the outside. So even though it might not look like it, there's a whole world going on inside there. And kind of like a city, the thousands of bees in a hive spend their days hard at work, carrying out a multitude of different tasks that are all individual but connected. So without further ado, let's introduce you to the members of the colony.
All right, everybody, let's learn about these colony members. The first member of our colony seen here is our worker bee. So worker bees live for a mere 30 to 40 days during their foraging season, but in that short amount of time will accomplish so much. And they make up about 90 to 95% of the colony and are given their name because they do the vast majority of work that happens in a hive, and they've really earned it. Secondly, we have the drones, which, no, this is not the queen, it's a drone. I kind of think of these guys as the teddy bears of the colony, and they are all male. So they make up a tiny part of honeybee colonies, about 5 to 10% depending. And they also have a very small task list. So unlike their sisters, the workers, they don't have stingers, they don't forage for food, they actually don't do very much to contribute to the construction and maintenance of the hive. And their lifespans vary depending on if they successfully mate with a virgin queen or not. So their time to shine kind of comes once in a blue moon when they have the opportunity to fertilize a virgin queen from a different hive. So lastly, we have our queen, and she is the mother of the tens of thousands of honeybees in a colony. So she's busy. A queen's lifespan can be anywhere from 3 to 5 years, and she is nearly twice as long as the worker bees. So kind of her telltale identifier for us when we're looking for her is that long kind of amber abdomen that you see in this photo. And she is the reproductive center of the colony. And at peak season, she can lay up to 2,000 eggs a day. So here we have a great image of a well-attended queen. And this is what we want to see as beekeepers. We want to see that this is an indicator that her pheromone is strong, that that the workers are attached to her. It will fade as she ages. So this image is really excellent. You see the one by her eyes is probably feeding her or cleaning her face. And the ones kind of around her backside, kind of creating that semicircle, they're going to clean her and feed her and just attend to all of her needs and also touch her to spread her pheromone throughout the colony. So pheromones is one of the ways that bees communicate, and you can really tell if a hive is queenless. If I'm approaching a queenless hive, I can hear a different pitch in the buzz, and their behavior will be different. And it's kind of this pheromone that helps keep the peace in the colony. So even though all of our workers and our drones are laid by the same queen, there is actually an impressive amount of genetic diversity in a colony because the queen is fertilized with by an average of about 12 to 20 drones when she takes her what we call a mating flight when she is a new virgin queen. It's in that flight that she will collect all of the biological material that she will use to lay for the rest of her life. And so some of these worker bees are going to be half sisters and some are going to be full sisters. Another note on drones, or at least the queen's ability, is that she has the ability to lay a fertilized egg, which will become a worker, a female worker, or an unfertilized egg, which will become a drone. And the cool thing about the drone specifically is that she is essentially reproducing on her own and creating like a male clone of herself. And when we see drones in a hive, it's a really beautiful indicator of health because they don't contribute to the maintenance of the hive and they don't make honey and stuff like that. So to have drones in a colony is a sign of strength because it means that they're supporting kind of extra mouths to feed, I guess you could say. And it's all to contribute to the genetic diversity of other future virgin queens from other colonies, which just is excellent. Okay, so next, um, while it sounds like a matriarch, the worker bees actually have a lot of power. So let's take a look at how they develop. Here we have a stunning image of an egg. Now, this is extremely magnified. A worker bee takes 21 days to develop, and from the time they are laid as an egg like this to the time that they emerge out of the cell. So the queen's long abdomen helps her get to the very bottom, and it stands upright and looks like a tiny, tiny grain of rice. So as the worker bee egg develops, it will next turn into a larva. And we've got some great images of that to show you too today. If you look in the bottom right corner, you see an egg, and right above that, there's a tiny little larva, and then they kind of get juicier as you drift left. So during this time, the worker bees will feed the larva constantly. They will be fed 150 to 800 times a day. They are just constantly swimming in that royal jelly and other things that they are fed in development. So finally, after 21 days, they will hatch out. Now, this image feels computer generated. It's cute. And after 21 days, they'll chew through the wax capping that covers the larva around 10 days. They'll finish developing underneath, and they'll chew through it. And their natural instinct is to, right after they're born, turn around and clean the cell that they were just born out of so that it can be used again for the next egg. So they are born and, true to their names, are just right to work. So over the course of the next 30 to 40 days, whatever their lifespan ends up becoming, the worker bee is going to live an amazing life and master a plethora of different tasks in the colony. So some of you may have heard of, the different things that need to happen in there, whether it's ventilating or fanning or guarding. And I know I've personally been asked as a beekeeper, like, how do they kind of become assigned these things? And the truth is that they do all of them. They do all of them depending on their age. So unlike humans that tend to specialize in a certain job, bees actually transition between these different roles. And something that actually might surprise you is that workers actually don't fly for the first couple weeks of their lives. So that beginning half will be indoor tasks, and then the latter half will be outdoor tasks. So let's get back to cleaning. I mentioned that when they hatch out, they turn around and clean. So that's seen here. Then they'll do that for the first couple days of their lives. And then their second task is to transition into being a nurse bee. So beekeepers refer to baby bees, or eggs, larvae, and pupa, as we just mentioned, as brood. So this is a beautiful image of eggs on the far kind of bottom right corner, all the way to capped brood. You're seeing all stages of development here. And these bees here are young nurse bees. So even though they just themselves hatched out, say, 2 to 3 days ago, they then become responsible for the ones that are right behind them, which I think is pretty special. So other indoor kind of pre-flying roles that they may have include guarding the entrance. They might fan their wings to thermoregulate the hive, whether it's to kind of air condition it or warm it up. They do both. And they will also receive nectar from older bees that are foragers and participate in the process of making and storing honey. So they might even have a stint as one of the queen's entourage, as we saw in that beautiful, well-attended image. So around 12 days, around the 12-day-old mark, that's when our worker bees will become builders, little architects. And the wax glands on the underside of their abdomens will become productive, and they'll have the ability to kind of excrete these sheets of wax out. Now, the wax actually comes out white, or even sometimes close to clear, and it takes on color as it's used. So that yellow color, I believe it comes from just kind of absorbing some pollen, and it changes over time. And there are different types of wax in the hive too. So frames used for brood rearing for the babies will become darker because of the kind of cocoons and chrysalis that the larvae kind of spin when they're underneath. It'll become dark. And then some honey frames will be like really light. So that's pretty neat. But making wax is a really, really resource intensive process. So it takes about 8 kilos of honey to make 1 kilo of wax. And the signature hexagonal shape, which I have some frames here to show you possibly during the question period, that signature hexagonal honeycomb shape is actually strategic because it's the most efficient use of wax and creates the perfect size for a single adult bee to fit in. So it's for nothing to be wasted. Let's talk about what happens when our worker becomes a forager. So we covered some indoor tasks, and this is her learning how to communicate where to find resources outside the hive. So this is a video of the waggle dance. So the duration of the waggle, and you see she's got a very attentive audience around her right here. The duration of the waggle communicates the distance, and the angle communicates the direction. So they perform the waggle dance to share with each other how to find the best resources of food. And it all has to do with communicating how to get there in relation to the sun. So amazing. Foragers fly, they fly. They now have the ability to fly. And one of their foraging tools is actually the fuzz on their body. So that serves a purpose. Something I admire about pretty much everything in nature is nothing is for no reason. And while I would personally accept the fuzz being there for cuteness reasons, it's actually there to serve a very functional purpose, which is pollen collection. So the fuzz on their bodies, and this image shows a beautiful little dusty bee. The fuzz actually charges through static electricity in flight, so that when they land on a highly kind of dusty, pollen dusty plant, it will just kind of glob onto them, and then they will be able to comb it down and ball it up onto basket-like structures on their legs to carry it home. So the cursor on the screen is kind of circling the beginnings of what us beekeepers affectionately call pollen pants. They are these perfect little round yellow balls, but they start off being very dusty like this one. So when they're foraging, they will use their straw-like tongue to collect nectar from plants as well. And yeah, pollen is their protein and nectar is their carbohydrate. They have a foraging radius of 5 kilometers around the hive. So they have a lot of distance to cover if they want. So the act of foraging and gathering pollen is what makes honeybees pollinators, but they aren't the only ones. They aren't the only ones. Hundreds of other native bee species and birds and bats and butterflies and moths contribute to pollination. Certain types of wasps and flies contribute to pollination. And even beyond North America, monkeys, lemurs, rodents, and even lizards have been known to pollinate plants. And in urban settings, this helps reproduce our gardens and our parks. And in agricultural settings, this helps reproduce the crops on farms that contribute to growing up to 2/3 of our food supply. So it's pollinators like this worker bee that allow the plants that we rely on to reproduce. And without pollinators visiting and fertilizing flowers, as I mentioned, we could see a catastrophic loss in plant life and a catastrophic loss in the foods that we love to enjoy, including coffee, which I think is a highly persuasive argument to a lot of people. In agricultural areas, it's pollinators, in part honeybees, who have the monumental task of pollinating the billions of flowers that it takes to grow the fruits and vegetables and nuts that we eat. And a lot of these are grown using pesticides. So as a culture in North America, I think it can be easy for us to feel disconnected from our food systems and take them for granted. Because the grocery store just always seems abundant. But we need to be mindful that honeybees don't become the invisible collateral damage as part of this production process. So When pollinators visit flowers that have been sprayed with pesticides, they can be ingesting toxic chemicals that are meant to kill other pests and can result in, millions of them dying. The biggest threat to all bee species is climate change, habitat loss, and pesticide use. So we love to use honeybees as kind of an ambassador bee um, to encourage people to be mindful of how we can protect all pollinators. Because if you're tuning in from Toronto, there are over 350 types of bees in Toronto alone. And as Angela mentioned, over 4,000 in North America. So we need to protect all bees. Honeybees are not necessarily as endangered in the same way as a lot of the native and solitary species out there that can't necessarily be studied and protected the same way that honeybees can be, because they are highly domesticated. So some of the ways we can protect pollinators, especially in our cities, is supporting urban and local small-scale farming, planting pollinator-friendly flowers in your garden, opting for organic produce where you can, supporting habitat protection and restoration, and reducing the use of pesticides around your home if you have an issue and are at a crossroads to make a decision of how you want to address that. So to bring it back to our honeybee, it could be argued that our Oxford bees know Toronto better than anybody. They can know where the best lavender in the city is growing. They could know that the vacant lot that looks like a little bit of an eyesore is actually, a paradise of weeds. Our worker bee in this little image is one of hundreds of thousands in the city, and her colony is also just one of hundreds in the city. And each hive is unique. Us beekeepers know this. We have intimate relationships with our bees, and we know kind of how they're thriving differently, and we think about what factors influence them. And when we open these quiet and unassuming boxes to this incredible self-sufficient world of this super organism that just works with incredible, unrelenting, intuitive, and collaborative teamwork, it keeps you humble. Frankly, it keeps you humble. And beekeepers never talk about the value of an individual bee. The collective achievements of a hive are the result of that teamwork, and the value of each bee is so much more than the sum of its parts. So we are so happy to be able to share this experience with you, with the hives that we get to host at Oxford. And we encourage you to try to see the city, wherever you are, the city that you are in, from a bee's eye view, and realize it's more than a concrete jungle. And in reality, just such rich environments for all sorts of species to thrive, even the ones that are teeny tiny and kind of fly under the radar. So if anyone has questions, we have some time now for that. Angela, are you able to see anything in the chat?
I am. So I am looking. There's actually amazing amount of questions. So we have, here, I'll stop the presentation. So we have a question from Lisa saying, I'm hoping to learn what to plant to bring them to my yard. And that's a really great question, because depending on the climate, there's lots of different types of bees, or lots of different types of plants and flowers that bees will be attracted to. And it also completely depends on the time of the year. So right now, I think in North America, what is happening is like the tree pollen is actually an incredible source of getting the bees started in the spring. So maple trees, willow trees, linden trees, all of these trees are flowering. And so even just simply having trees in your yard is excellent. Depending on where you live, crocuses are an excellent early spring flower for bees to bring in. And there's a special kind of sort of crocusy bulb early spring flower called Russian squill, or the scilla flower. And they actually have blue pollen. And so it's a pretty magical thing to see blue pollen pants. Some other sort of more universal plants that are good for trees, or sorry, are good for bees are lavender is an excellent one. That's a very sort of hardy type plant that can work in a lot of climates. Sort of fruiting trees. So if you have crab apples, or if you have quince, or if you have pears or plums, those are generally very excellent. I know also in late summer, plants like echinacea are wonderful because they have a very long sort of nectar release period. Asters and goldenrod in the late fall are excellent as well. So and yielding a quick Google search will actually give you sort of a vast plethora that are very specific to the region of where you're from. So thank you so much for asking that. I'm a big flower lover, so I love answering that question.
I'm going to answer a couple questions that I can see now, just a little bit more rapid fire if I can.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Alexandra asks what Oxford properties have their own beehives. For me in Toronto, I take care of the hives at RBC Water Park Place, at 325 Front Street, and at 111 Richmond through the Google offices. So those are my 3 sites.
And so my 3 sites, or I have a number of sites actually with Oxford. So I have the TD Canada Trust buildings, I believe, the Royal Bank Plaza, Canada Life building, I believe Canada Square, thank you. Metro Center as well. A lot of those ones are sort of clustered downtown, which is really fun. We have our runs where we like visit all of them in one day.
So many. So Diane asks, are wasps dangerous to bees? So glad you asked, Diane, because yeah, they actually are. People often confuse bees and wasps together, but wasps are like smooth and really bright yellow, like high contrast angular bodies, and they are omnivores. So they eat meat. That's why they're so persistent around your food and quite annoying. And they actually have the ability to sting multiple times, and their venom is worse. I know from experience, their venom is worse. Whereas honeybees, they're so docile in nature, and really stinging is a last resort for them because it's an action they don't survive. It's really something that's worst case scenario to protect the colony, like a last dying act. But wasps, as omnivores, like eat meat, and that includes bee larvae and honeybee bodies themselves as well. So there are different times in the season where wasps can be like more aggressive towards bees, and we'll see them kind of getting into a dog pile in the hive when we're there, and they are, I'm not gonna lie, they are annoying. Do queens ever leave the hive?
I love this question.
So there are really 2 specific scenarios where a queen will leave the hive. The first is when she is a newly hatched virgin queen, and she spends, the first 4 or 5 days of her life just kind of getting ready for her mating flight, stretching, waiting for good weather. The first time she leaves is to find a drone congregation cloud. That's what they're called. And she will zip through it, and it's real like survival of the fittest. Like only the fastest drones can mate with her. So she leaves for her mating flight, which is when she collects all the biological material she'll use to lay for the rest of her life, as I mentioned in the presentation. The second chance she might fly, which hopefully won't ever happen, that's kind of the beekeeper's role, is to prevent this, is if the colony swarms. So swarming is a colony's way of reproducing. It's when they get super big and they've outgrown their home. So they take the existing queen and half the bees and leave, and they leave the remaining half of the colony behind to raise a new queen. And they'll do this by choosing any of the last queen's final eggs and just loading them up with royal jelly. Queens are fed a different diet, so they will raise a new queen that way. So queens aren't really built to fly very much. So even in swarming, they try to stay like rather short distances away. And unlike the kind of cartoonish Winnie the Pooh, imagery of a swarm like attacking people, swarms are actually so docile, because here's kind of a bonus fact for you, is that when bees are preparing to swarm, they gorge themselves on honey and are so full that they can't bend their abdomens to sting you. So we sometimes touch swarms and it's like a big jelly ball, and we're not threatened at all. So those are the two moments a queen will leave, is to mate, and maybe hopefully not, because we want to keep them. That's what makes us beekeepers, for swarming. Angela, do you want to check off any more questions?
Yeah. So Diane also asked how big can hives get? So we mentioned that a single honeybee hive can have up to 50,000 bees in the peak season, and that's usually around during like July and August. And so the population of a honeybee hive, it sort of correlates to like what's actually going on in the season. So the reason why it can get that big is because it's like honey production, like super mode. So there needs to be lots of bees to forage, to produce the honey, to nurse all the new bees coming in. And then what happens sort of in September is the hive actually collectively starts to prepare for the fall and for the winter. So the queen will start slowing down her laying. The foragers will, like, what happens in the sort of typical life cycle is eventually the sort of, as the worker bees sort of reach their own end of their life cycle, there will be sort of fewer and fewer bees to replace them. And what the queen will also start doing at around like the fall is start laying special winter bees. And so these bees are actually physically bigger than a regular worker bee. They have more fat bodies. So their whole job during the winter is to actually keep the hive warm. Bees don't actually hibernate. They stay sort of awake and active, but in this very tight cluster in the hive. So what we do is at Oxford, all of the beehives stay for the entire year on the rooftops. We wrap them up, and just to kind of keep the cluster extra warm. And so that is during the time when like the population can dip down to, I think, like almost around 20,000 bees, which still is a lot, but it can get down to even 10,000. And 5,000, says Andy. So right now, we are back in spring. We have started opening the hives. And so spring is sort of like a really crucial time for the population growth to like build. So we are kind of on like the uptick swell of the colony population. And so as you saw in the photos with the stacked boxes, our job as beekeepers is to sort of assess what's going on with the population, be able to sort of understand what's going to be kind of coming up. So we will like make room or reduce room because we want to make sure that the bees stay warm or like have enough space.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm going to look at other questions here. Diane also asks, aren't dandelions important for bees? Yeah, dandelions are actually one of the first resources, food resources for bees in spring. I believe the maple sugar or sugar maples or some kind of tree. I believe that's actually kind of the first thing that feeds bees. I know people sometimes think it's dandelions. They're definitely among there. They're definitely important in the spring. So avoid pulling your weeds. It's a little buffet that they love to find. And what's fascinating about bees, about bees finding resources, as I talked about the waggle dance and stuff like that, but bees have actually co-evolved to see in the colors flowers bloom in. And it has been scientifically proven that when a bee lands on a flower, that flower actually has the ability to respond to the vibrational presence of that bee and give it a little burst of nectar as like a thanks for helping me reproduce. Here's like a sweet little reward. So yeah, T. Hancock enjoys seeing bees coming and going from their hive. It's very sweet, isn't it? It's so unsuspecting. People hear numbers like 50,000 and they don't understand how they're perfectly quiet and it's like they're not there. How far will bees travel to get flowers? They have a foraging radius of about 5 kilometers. So they've got a really wide radius of where to go. Bait Cloud has shared that they started their own colony last June. That's so great. What a nice time to start. June bees are the best. And I've asked, have you switched the supers after winter? I read that you should. And have you added a honey super yet? Okay, so this is a great question, kind of
Real
more of a
beekeeping questions.
So, as professional beekeepers, we have the great joy and privilege of seeing sometimes more in a single day than a backyard beekeeper will see in an entire season. So, we are the pros. And I totally understand your question because if you have one hive and you're just kind of like patiently waiting and trying to read the signs of nature, it can sometimes be hard to know what to do when. And we have a lot of guidance within our company. So the question of have you switched the supers after winter? So we overwinter our hives at one box, and we make sure our frames are marked to indicate the year, to indicate how old they are, because it's important to switch out your wax and not let your wax get too old, because wax has a memory and can kind of like hold some residual chemicals from various treatments you might give to protect them from various pests and pathogens. So the wax cycling and tracking is important. So switch supers, no, they start their season in that one box, and we don't like just put them in an entirely new box. What we do in spring though is if the colony is, say, filling out more than like 60% of the box, so call it like 5 or 6 frames from underneath, not looking on top, is we'll do what is called under supering. So we will take a box and put it underneath the brood box, because in spring their instinct is to grow down, and that is a swarm prevention technique. But typically throughout the summer, as I'm sure you know, you add boxes on top. So no honey supers yet. That is for later in the season. We don't want to give them space that they don't need yet, and that they won't touch yet. So that is for in maybe 6 weeks or more.
Mm-hmm. So I think we have maybe time for just one more question. Laura Jones is asking, when do I need to put out my bee house for leaf cutters in the spring? How deep do the holes in it need to be? I'm in Calgary. So I personally have seen bee houses that have either very short tubes, or the one that I just saw this weekend was like almost about like 3 to 4 inches long. Personally, I'm not sure about when in spring specifically, but I think it wouldn't necessarily hurt to have it out there just so that any native bees can use it just as soon as possible. But typically with honeybees specifically, the queen's kind of laying from spring to fall. So I'm not personally sure when a leafcutter and mason bee would do it, but probably around this time as the weather gets warmer is a great idea to put it out.
Yeah. I'm just going to quickly answer a question from T. Hancock, because it's pulling at my heartstrings a little bit, but it's, are there tours to see the beehives downtown? So unfortunately, no, there are not tours. But what we like to offer in non-COVID times, as you referred to, are workshops on site. A popular one through the summer is the Meet Your Bees workshop, where we have people come out to the hives with us and are able to hold frames and see bees for themselves. So that's as close to a tour as we get. We offer workshops all year round as part of the service package for our Oxford sites, and it's so early in the season, nothing's booked up yet, but we really hope that with the Oxford Connect team and stuff, we can continue to promote those future dates and see you again. So thank you all for being here with us on this Earth Day. It was so nice to see all your questions, and we hope you learned something.
Yeah, and a big thank you to the Oxford Connects team for hosting us. What wonderful hosts. Thank you to Leah and Lorna and Ali for all of your hard work putting this together. And also a shout out to our team manager, Prafula, for all of her support and guidance during this time. Thank you again for coming to learn, and we hope that you get to see some bees soon.